Ice baths, cold plunges, winter swims. Cold therapy is everywhere right now. Before you jump in or write it off, ask yourself, do you actually know what cold exposure is doing to your body? Because this isn't just a trend. Cold has a real impact on your immune system, stress response, mood, and sleep. What's cool, we no longer have to guess. We have the data to prove it. In this episode, I'm breaking down what's really happening in your brain and body, why even a few minutes in the cold can change the way you recover, focus, and handle stress. But more importantly, I'll show you how to use cold therapy safely, effectively, in a way that actually fits your life. No extremes, just clear guidance. Cold therapy might just be one of the most powerful tools you haven't explored yet. Let me show you how. Can you do one quick thing to help this channel grow? Just tap the subscribe button. It's completely free and helps us bring you more of these episodes. Now let's get into it. Today, we are diving into a topic that's both ancient and avant-garde, cold therapies. Temperature has a profound influence on every organ and system in our body. And intentional use of temperature can be used to enhance many aspects of health and performance. You can probably conjure up in your mind the icy plunges embraced by Wim Hof enthusiasts. Wim has definitely been one of the loudest and most entertaining proponents of cold exposure. And indeed, cold therapies are absolutely a hot topic in the wellness world. So with so much buzz, conflicting opinions, and varying practices, how do we actually discern fact from fad? Are these therapies really beneficial, or are they just part of the latest trend? So the reality is the use of cold therapies actually dates back thousands of years. Ancient civilizations across the globe recognized their therapeutic benefits. And for me, I grew up in Maine. So I'm definitely no stranger to cold and cold water. It was just kind of part of daily life. And then through my athletic journey, I played a couple sports in college and then played on the U.S. national team and eventually became a Division I head coach. So, throughout all of these experiences, cold therapies were very much embedded into our recovery programming. What has really fascinated me is just, observing how individuals, especially those new to cold exposure, respond to it. Beyond, I think, just the physical benefits, there are clear psychological benefits. And I'll get into what the science says about both, and I'll talk about the benefits and the risks, and I think most importantly, provide you, hopefully, with what you feel are actionable practices that you can use to harness the power of cold for your health and performance. So I'm not just a practitioner, but my team at Whoop and I are actively researching the effect of cold on the general population as well as elite athletes. We have an ongoing clinical trial, and we're also collaborating with biopsych analytics on a study with Wim Hof, exploring both physiological and psychological impacts of cold. And so I'll kind of touch on all of that, but just wanted to let you know that I'm definitely deep inside the science, both from an applied perspective as well as ongoing research. So let's dive in. So in nature, resilience doesn't necessarily come from avoiding stress. It actually comes from responding to it, recovering from it, and growing because of it. And this is kind of the paradox of stress. When delivered in the right dose at the right time with room for recovery, it doesn't actually weaken us. It actually strengthens us. And this is really at the heart of a process called hormesis. And this is a biological principle that in small amounts of self-induced stress, you can actually stimulate adaptation and resilience, whereas higher levels of that same stress would actually be harmful. So cold exposure falls into this bucket of hormesis. When it's introduced properly, you can actually train your autonomic nervous system, okay, which I refer to as your ANS. You can improve your body's thermoregulatory capacity. It can impact your hormones in a positive way when done appropriately. Also, immune function, although the evidence is a little less robust as it relates to cold and immune, as well as mood. So I'm going to kind of get into all of that. But the goal here is really for you to come away with a basic understanding of the mechanisms, the biology of thermoregulation, and what we know from the literature in terms of men versus women, and most importantly, if you choose to do it, how to integrate these practices into your life with kind of very specific protocols. I think at a foundational level, temperature is a very powerful stimulus. So it's super important that prior to engaging in any of these practices, you check in with a board certified physician. And definitely want to say that very clearly. Everyone is going to come to the table with a different health status and a different health history. And the reality is, for some individuals with certain conditions, cold therapy might actually do more harm than good. So, the purpose of today's podcast is not really to, flesh out all of that. It's more just to give folks a general understanding of, as I said, the mechanism and the practices and how you can build it into your life. But you have to really take responsibility for yourself and understand your own health and make sure you reach out to the appropriate folks so you can understand if this is right for you. I also want to point out that while these practices do induce discomfort, that is precisely what makes them effective. So I would encourage you to explore the minimum threshold of stimulus that will allow you to derive maximum benefit. But you're going to need to experiment. Every person is, there's so much individual variability, and you can just see this discourse happening online, right? Where, um, you know, people have wildly different experiences and responses to cold. So you definitely need to experiment in order to kind of find what is going to be most effective and efficient for you to kind of capture the benefits. All right, deliberate cold exposure. So why do I say deliberate? Well, the term deliberate is used in the context of cold exposure to really emphasize the intentional and controlled nature of the practice. So when individuals choose to face the discomfort of cold, they are exercising top-down control, the brain's ability to regulate bodily responses. So this intentional act is really what I think is at the heart of why we see deliberate cold exposure as such a potent practice to strengthen mental resilience. So cold therapy involves exposing the body to cold temperatures through methods like cold water immersion. Now, this could be in the form of an ice bath, shower, winter swimming, or whole body cryotherapy. Water can be still or circulating, or in the case of a shower, actually pulsating. So today I'm going to focus on the use of water and not really talk about air, but just there are other ways to get cold exposure just by ambient temperature or the use of cryotherapy. All right, so digging into the protocols for cold therapy. I'm going to kind of work my way through cold showers, cold baths, and then winter swimming. So, and each of them kind of have a little bit of nuance in terms of, kind of time and temperature but generally speaking, the principles are largely the same. All right, so looking at cold showers. So I think the overall goal is definitely to, reducing inflammation, right? Trying to enhance mood, increase alertness, build resilience. We even saw in one of the studies that there is some evidence that it reduces sick days. So that's kind of cool. In terms of temperature, I think just principally for all cold, you want it to be uncomfortable enough where you want to get out. Okay, that means the water's probably cold enough. But generally speaking, on a shower, you want to put it as cold as it's going to go. And, that's typically going to be, 59 to 55 degrees, probably Fahrenheit. So anywhere from kind of 12 to 15 degrees Celsius. I talked about this a little bit, but you're definitely going to feel your heart rate is gonna jack up, your breath rate is going to increase, and you're gonna feel a little panicky, but that's where you have to breathe through it. Okay, that's the key. You want to go from the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, so sympathetic activation, and then as you regain control of your breath, you're going to shift into that parasympathetic state where you become a bit more calm and you kind of settle into your breath and you regain control. And again, that's kind of where the magic happens. So I point that out now because you need to kind of hit probably 30 seconds in order to get that shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic. For some folks who are new, it's going to take you 30 seconds just to get control of your breath. Okay. And then you want to try to extend that 30 seconds more if you can. Okay. And really take advantage of that calm and relaxation that is happening when you're in that parasympathetic state. So you're basically looking to be in the cold in the shower from anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes. Now, when you first start out, you might only make it 20 seconds, maybe 10, and that's okay. You got to build into it, right? But every time you can kind of push a little bit further as you get more comfortable. I think if you kind of go from like, immediately to cold, that might be a little bit more jarring. So if you kind of just slowly go, from maybe you start hot and then you just kind of bring it to cold, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes folks, heating up actually helps, might actually make it a little bit harder because your skin is going to be hot. So the cold water could actually feel colder. But that said, you just have to figure out what is going to be best for you. I tend to just put how I would do it for a cold shower is I kind of get the temperature almost at a medium temperature, so probably like 65-ish. And I kind of get in, it definitely feels cold. And then I ramp it colder from there. So it's not like my skin is hot, which again is going to make it feel more extreme. Whereas if you go in and it's already kind of cold, but not totally uncomfortable, you can kind of ease your way into a bit more cold. And I think too, like exposing your torso first and maybe even kind of your back as opposed to your head, will also, I think, help you ease into it. And then again, just kind of play around with it. You're going to maybe go from just the back. And then when you turn around, it's going to feel really cold. So again, just kind of experiment as you get more acclimated, try to aim to get the cold water all over. Getting it on the head and the back of the neck, especially, is really where you can see, some of that return, especially the back of the neck. That's where your vagus nerve is, which is connected to the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, right? So that's kind of what helps facilitate the recovery. And in terms of frequency, you can do this daily, or at least 3 to 4 times a week. But as we saw in one of the studies, consistency really does matter. So in order to kind of get the benefits, you actually have to do the cold. So anywhere, 3 times a week is I think perfectly acceptable. But again, just go based on how you feel. For some folks, they do a cold shower, 30 seconds every single day. And I can't imagine that has any negative effects whatsoever. So again, experiment, determine what feels right for you, and then just plug it into your routine. All right, on to ice baths. All right, so these are the ones that you've probably seen. If you're on Instagram, you see people getting into these icy baths, and they could be, kind of a garbage can type of tub, or, these longer kind of just baths. But ice baths, I think, are really good for helping kind of manage muscle soreness. Again, really effective at decreasing inflammation. We don't see that as much in the shower per se. So there is something about immersing the whole body in cold water that really does help decrease inflammation, and really does support recovery. And this is why, and there's a lot of data on athletes, not as much on the general population, but one of the reasons why athletic populations use ice baths, as part of their kind of, programming, is because it really does support physiological recovery. In terms of temperature, again, we're looking at the same kind of ranges, and same principle applies. You want it to be cold enough where you want to get out, right? It's got to be uncomfortable. And again, that's going to be somewhere between, 50 to 59 Fahrenheit, 10 to 15 Celsius. And that range is effective for the therapeutic benefits that we're talking about without excessive risk. Based on the literature, what we've seen, you do not have to go too much below 55 degrees to get the benefit. That said, if you are very much cold adaptive, maybe in order to kind of, activate that principle of it's got to be cold enough where you want to get out, you might have to go into the 40-degree range. So again, highly individual. You need to do what works for you, but, colder is not necessarily better. When we're looking at duration, Again, start ease into it. 30 seconds, a minute. What the literature says that somewhere between 2 to 3 minutes is going to be plenty of time to kind of get all the benefits, the mood, the reduction in inflammation, the metabolic effects. A couple minutes, 2 to 3 minutes is going to be plenty. Some folks go 5 to 10 minutes, right, who are really adapted. Again, you need to figure out what's best for you. And if you have the ability to monitor your data, so look at, all right, when I do it, what is happening with my sleep based on my averages? Do I feel better? Like, do I feel more alert? Do I feel happier, right? Sometimes when folks are spending a lot of time in the cold, kind of beyond that 3 minutes, they actually feel quite lethargic when they get out. So again, if you're doing it before a workout, which is perfectly acceptable, and there's a lot of folks who do it, you might want to make it a shorter bout because it is a little fatiguing, right, to be in the cold because your body's kind of working, right, and feels a little bit tense. So again, play around with the minutes and think about what it is that you need to do next, right, and how you might use the modality to kind of help you engage in whatever it is that you're doing next more effectively. What we see with cold baths in terms of frequency, anywhere from 2 to 4 times per week, and what we see in our data, which is really interesting, is that it does depend on your training intensity and what your recovery needs are. So these are preliminary data. Just want to caveat that they have not gone through peer review yet. But what we see is that for casual exercisers, so folks who work out less than 4 times per week, you can do an ice bath up to 3 times without seeing diminishing return on markers of recovery. And this is controlling for all the things that could move around your recovery. So things like sleep weight consistency, alcohol consumption, altitude, sickness, you name it, we controlled for it. And we still had a massive, massive data set to look at. And this is looking at both men and women. Okay, so the effects are really no different between men and women. If you are more than a casual exerciser, which means you are exercising 5 or more times per week, 2 times per week is going to be your sweet spot. Because what we see is that, and I think the plausible explanation here is that when you are exercising a lot with a high degree of intensity, that is in of itself also a hormetic stressor. So when you're layering on, stress on top of stress, it gets to a point where there is diminishing return. And that is really what we see in the data. And then one of the cool takeaways is that we definitely saw that when you are engaging in an ice bath on days that you're not exercising, you get greater sleep consistency benefits, which is interesting. So on days that you're not exercising, engaging in cold can actually help facilitate more consistent sleep-wake times. Another thing that we see in the data, when folks are doing ice baths post-exercise, it can actually enhance recovery by improving the depth and duration of your sleep. It's kind of neat. Another, I think, aspect of ice bath use in relation to exercise, and this one, I think there's quite a bit of conflicting evidence, but I think some of the newer studies that have come out that are really well done and are controlled have shown that cold water immersion or ice baths after strength training does not actually blunt muscle growth adaptations. So I think it's pretty safe to do an ice bath literally any time of the day. I would do it whenever it feels the best to you and elicits all of the positive kind of things that we've been talking about. Again, just pay attention to how you feel and just, make decisions based on that. But I think in terms of, muscle recovery, a couple minutes in an ice bath is not going to blunt muscle growth adaptations. That said, if you are concerned, give yourself a 4-hour buffer by, from the time that you end your strength training session, give yourself 4 hours before you go into the cold, or do it beforehand. All right. So looking at winter swimming, I think the goal here is, not too dissimilar, but I think with winter swimming, it's very much about community. So you're out with other folks and you're doing open water swimming, often in nature. So there's this really beautiful, I think, moment where you kind of get to be out in the elements doing, something hard. So I think there is this element of really boosting mental resilience, and then all the other kind of benefits that we talked about in terms of enhancing circulation and stimulating brown fat. Winter swimming, definitely, I think, is a super fun activity to get into. I definitely do some winter swimming. I live in, Boston, so it's nice and cold here. So I can pretty much winter swim from, you know, October until April. The temperature are definitely going to get colder. They're going to range, from anywhere from 37, 34, to 59. So it can get really cold. But if you kind of start in October and you're just doing it consistently, one or two times per week, your body's just going to kind of adapt along the way. And, when you start, generally speaking, again, all the same kind of principles apply. You want to start with really short, submersions, so 30 seconds to a minute. And then as your body kind of adapts, you can gradually increase that. Generally speaking, most folks are going to be swimming under 10 minutes. And I think in terms of frequency, a couple times a week, allowing, plenty of recovery between sessions. You can imagine 10 minutes in, kind of icy waters is going to put a lot of stress on the body. So you want to make sure that you're allowing adequate recovery between sessions. The other thing to consider is using appropriate gear. Obviously, kind of one of the important features of winter swimming is that you just have your bathing suit on and you're not, it's not like you have a wetsuit or anything. But you might want to consider some neoprene gloves or booties because your extremities are going to get colder. So, even for ice bath, as well, there's no shame in putting on some neoprene gloves or booties which will allow you to kind of stay in the cold for longer and derive some of those, some of the benefits that go with a bit of, extending your time in the cold. So just some safety tips. I think it's, really important, especially if you're going out into, the open water. It's great to have a swim buddy, go with a group of folks. And you probably want to be careful about submerging your head. Um, unless, you're used to that, or, when you do it, just make sure you're kind of in a safe environment. Just because that there is a risk of cold shock when you submerge your head. Cold is no joke, right? The cold shock response and hypothermia are real risks. So if you start to feel dizzy or numbness or confused, you need to get out of the water immediately and make sure you talk to someone and talk about how you're feeling, and so they can get you the help that you need. If you kind of get to that point where you are really confused, sometimes that can, create a scenario where you really do put yourself at risk. So make sure that, again, you're with a group, with a buddy. We're not winning awards here. So if you start to feel strange, it's not about toughing it out. You need to make sure you keep yourself safe. I think the key here with cold showers, ice baths, and cold water swimming is to absolutely listen to your body. As I said, individual responses are absolutely going to vary. And you really want to pay attention to how you're feeling before, during, and after the session. And, come up with a protocol that really fits with your lifestyle, makes you feel good. And that's the one that is going to be best for you. So what I tried to do today is give you just a sense of the threshold, a sense of of just some of the potential benefits. But really it's up to you to experiment and do what you feel is best for you. One of the things that can really help is just warming up post exposure. So after you get in the cold, warm your body back up, get dry clothes on, have a warm beverage, and, actually you want to kind of avoid the hot showers immediately after, so you don't get kind of this sudden blood pressure change. And then I think the other piece that's really important is thinking about consistency over intensity. Um, and what I mean by that is, just regular, moderate exposure is going to yield probably better long term benefits than infrequent, intense sessions. Okay. So intensity as just super cold and maybe doing it more infrequently, as opposed to something like a temperature that is more moderate that you can kind of tolerate better. That's going to allow you to be more consistent with a practice, right? It's kind of like lifting weights, right? You don't want to lift so intensely that you can only lift one time a week, right? That's going to be way less effective, right? Because you're so sore. That's going to be way less effective than, lifting in a way where you can show up the next day and do it again, right? And that's kind of the same sort of principle that you can think about in terms of your cold water immersion practice. I think folks ask a lot about cold water immersion and age. There's no real restrictions. Certainly if you have underlying health conditions at any age, you should consult a board certified healthcare professional. But generally speaking, cold plunging and ice bath, cold shower are perfectly fine for anyone at any age. In terms of women and just general recommendations, there's honestly very limited data. This is where my team is trying to advance the science. We've got, as I said, we've got a clinical trial underway, and then we have other studies where we have lots of women engaging in ice baths. So we're going to work hard to try to get the science to where it needs to be so we can give better recommendations for women, but just pay attention to how you feel. Many women I know report incredible mental health benefits and see cold water immersion as a vital aspect to their kind of overall wellness journey. So I'm a firm believer to absolutely go with how you feel. And, I think if you want some evidence, maybe keep an eye out on your blood biomarkers or, just are you maintaining a regular period? Just things that, signals that you can pay attention to that are going to maybe help you understand if like what you're doing, the inputs, in this cold water immersion being an input is really kind of helping you from a health perspective. But I would say that, if you feel like from a mental health perspective that it's really vital for you, it probably is worth continuing, and maybe is going to outweigh some of these other maybe negative effects. But it's really up to you to kind of pay attention, so you can get the frequency and dose that's right for you. And if you're trying to get pregnant or you are pregnant, there are definitely some special considerations. So talk it through with your healthcare provider. I do know women who just are used to doing cold immersion and it's part of their practice and indeed carry through their entire pregnancy. But they do maybe just increase the temperature a bit. So maybe they were doing 55 before, they do 65, and just for a shorter duration, maybe 30 seconds as opposed to the 3 minutes that they did previously. So again, these are things that you need to check with, but check with your healthcare provider. But I think again, just being smart about the frequency and the dose and the temperature. And I think you can kind of arrive at a place that feels really good for you. And then finally, I think make sure you're consulting with a medical professional. Before beginning any cold exposure regimen, you want to make sure that, you understand the health concerns and that you are in a position to do it safely. When I started at Whoop, there were just 50 of us. Now we're a team of over 500. Over the years, I've been asked so many times about how we find people who care about our mission as much as we do. Because at Whoop, we are a collective who are deeply committed to optimizing human performance. A critical part of that mission is building a team that embodies drive, adaptability, and a shared commitment to excellence. So when it comes to finding the right individuals to join our mission, getting it right isn't just important, it's foundational to our success. That's why whenever we're hiring, we use LinkedIn, who's the sponsor of this podcast. LinkedIn has and continues to simplify the hiring process, helping us craft job descriptions, post opportunities for free, and connect with top-tier candidates using real data insights. Even when our team logs off for the night, LinkedIn continues to work away in the background, identifying the best talent, leaving us to focus on advancing our mission. It's hardly surprising that more than 2.5 million small and medium-sized businesses use LinkedIn to hire. If you want to discover your next exceptional team member or post your next job for free, head to linkedin.com/soul. linkedin.com/soul. So you can find your next A player. Terms and conditions apply. I've got exciting news to share about the company I work for and our show sponsor, Whoop. We have just launched the all-new Whoop. I have worked at Whoop for 9 years, and I could not be more excited about this generation. It's 7% smaller and now has 14 plus days of battery life, 2 weeks without having to charge this. Whoop medical grade now includes heart screener with on-demand ECG readings, meaning you can check in on your heart at any time and share those results with your doctor. The Whoop app also now includes a brand new feature called HealthSpan. And what HealthSpan does is it basically is an entry point into coaching in that it will show you exactly how your daily habits impact your pace of aging. Whoop is designed to help you improve your performance, longevity, and overall health. Visit join.whoop/science to try out the all-new Whoop and get a free month on me. That's join.whoop/science now. So I'm going to spend a chunk of time talking through inflammation and how cold water immersion might actually be able to reduce inflammation if in fact you have it. So when I was doing research for this podcast, I came across what is kind of a wild statistic. So according to a 2024 study published in Frontiers in Medicine, in the US, 35% of adults who appear otherwise healthy are actually struggling from chronic systemic inflammation, which is a huge number, right? And what's dangerous about it is systemic inflammation, particularly in its chronic form, is essentially a persistent, low-grade immune response, and that can contribute to all sorts of health issues. Unlike acute inflammation, which is kind of a short-term response to an injury or infection, chronic systemic inflammation can persist over time. And sometimes without noticeable symptoms, right? It might manifest as maybe just kind of fatigue or just feeling blah, feeling off, right? But again, over time, it's very much implicated in the development and progression of many diseases like cardiovascular, metabolic, mental health issues, autoimmune, arthritis, cancer, and even neurodegenerative disease. So I'm not going to suggest that cold therapy alone can solve your inflammation issues, but I thought it was really important to highlight how I suppose widespread inflammation actually is, and there is some evidence that cold water immersion, when it's part of a stack of other behaviors like diet, exercise, eliminating smoking and alcohol, this combination can actually help you potentially get your inflammation under control. So mechanistically, when the body is exposed to cold water, your blood vessels are going to constrict to conserve heat. This vasoconstriction is going to limit blood flow to basically all the affected areas. And what this does is reduce the influx of inflammatory mediators, as well as any related fluid accumulation to those areas. And as a result, swelling and inflammation are potentially minimized. Acute injuries can also introduce inflammation, which I mentioned. And you'll likely remember if you've had like a sprained ankle, you put ice on it, and you probably followed the RICE protocol, which is rest, ice, compression, and elevation. And essentially what you're trying to do here is control inflammation and reduce comfort and pain. And, what is happening here is that this reduced blood flow from the vasoconstriction, okay, when you're submerging yourself in the cold or putting on a cold pack, it's going to decrease nerve activity in the affected area. So these cold temperatures are going to numb the nerve endings, which is going to slow down the transmission of pain signals to the brain. And it's this numbing effect that is really what's providing that temporary pain relief. So definitely want to kind of caution that overuse of cold could actually impede the natural inflammatory response necessary for tissue repair. So for acute injuries, you're going to need to work with a healthcare provider. So you can dial in kind of the perfect protocol based on your injury and overall health status. The other thing that's happening is cold shock proteins. They play a really important role in modulating the body's inflammatory response. So you might be wondering what cold shock proteins are. So essentially, these are activated when cells experience a drop in temperature. So the cells in your body are going to experience that drop in temperature as soon as you get into the cold water. Once that happens, these proteins are going to act as a defense mechanism against the cold stress. So upon cold exposure, these proteins are upregulated, okay? And that leads to the regulation of pro and anti inflammatory cytokines. This modulation is actually what might help in reducing some of the chronic inflammation. Another benefit, and it's kind of the yang to the yin here, is that you have enhanced circulation. So as your body rewarms, so as you get out of the cold, the blood vessels are going to vasodilate or widen. And this widening is really an effort to restore normal blood flow. And this rebound effect increases circulation and delivers oxygen and nutrients to all the tissues. So this is the action that really helps with the removal of metabolic waste, and is kind of what helps support kind of the healing and recovery. And I like to say that it is the narrowing and the widening of the blood vessels, or otherwise known as the vascular pump, where kind of this recovery magic happens. All right, so the next one we're going to tackle is how cold water immersion can potentially reduce stress and improve sleep. In a recent systematic review, so this was a meta-analysis published in PLOS ONE in January of 2025, so this is very recent, and what they did is they examined the effects of cold water immersion on various measures of general health and well-being. And what was cool about this study, it was done in general population, and it analyzed data from 11 studies involving 3,177 participants, and it focused on outcomes like stress and sleep quality and overall quality of life. So one of the key findings was that cold water immersion could reduce stress levels, but the effect was actually time dependent. So stress reduction was observed approximately 12 hours post-exposure. So this might suggest that while you might not feel immediate relief, there could be delayed benefits in stress management. So if you get into the cold, maybe right away you're not feeling like, oh, this reduced my stress, but actually 12 hours later, individuals in the study reported that they feel a reduction in stress. The study also noted that participants who took cold showers of varying durations, so anywhere from 20 seconds to 90 seconds, reported slightly higher quality of life scores. So these effects tended to diminish after 3 months. So when people kind of stop doing the shower, you would expect the cold shower, they stop getting the benefits. So this suggests that, consistent practice is probably necessary in order to kind of maintain these quality of life benefits. Regarding sleep, there were some really cool associations between cold water immersion and better sleep outcomes. The data was primarily restricted to male participants, so it's a little unclear how broadly these findings applied. But in my own research here at WHOOP, which are preliminary data, we have not published them yet, but we're in the process of writing them up, we found that both men and women showed improvements that were statistically meaningful in cardiovascular function. And those effects were actually fully mediated by sleep duration and sleep consistency. So cold helped sleep duration and sleep consistency. So it helped facilitate a more consistent sleep onset and offset, and folks spent more time in bed, which in turn improved their cardiovascular profile. So the broad use of cold, and this could be a cold shower, ice bath, cold swimming, for varying lengths of time and temperature, are going to contribute positively overall to more stable sleep and longer sleep, which in turn is going to improve markers of cardiovascular health. We also saw really cool effects of cold for both men and women on sleep architecture. So on rest days, ice baths on those days, folks were spending less time in light sleep and more time in both REM and slow wave sleep, so these deeper, more restorative stages of sleep. On exercise days, ice baths increase all 3 sleep stages. So folks actually spent more time in light sleep, but also more time in REM and slow wave sleep, which was kind of cool because it suggests, I suppose, this kind of compound benefit for physiological recovery. So I think overall, cold water immersion definitely shows promise in reducing stress and potentially improving sleep and overall quality of life. That said, the effects are definitely nuanced. And, I always want to just kind of keep saying over and over again that the effects are going to vary a lot among individuals. And that is definitely consistent in the data. So again, personal experimentation is going to be really important. But I think the evidence is pretty clear that it's definitely something to try out because there are uh, potential benefits, that are when stacked with other lifestyle behaviors can really be beneficial. All right, so now getting into cold water immersion and its impact on mental clarity and mood improvement. So, the physiological mechanisms that underpin these effects are primarily through the activation of the body's stress response when exposed to cold water. What happens is the body initiates a stress response, which involves two primary systems: the autonomic nervous system and the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So, first, the ANS, or the autonomic nervous system. So what's happening is your sympathetic nervous system is going to be activated. So the initial cold shock is going to activate the fight or flight branch of the autonomic nervous system. And what's really cool about that moment is that you're going to feel really panicked, and this is part of the discomfort. Okay, it is not often, actually, in today's modern life that we have this opportunity to kind of feel that level of fight or flight. And this is really where the opportunity, I think, with cold water immersion really sits, is that you are in a moment of panic. You want to embrace that level of discomfort. And by embracing it and just kind of like sitting in the panic, that's a lot of where the resilience, comes from. So you want to use your breath in this moment to really bring your system down. And when you use your breath in this way, you're going to then move from this sympathetic, this activated state into a parasympathetic state. So you go from sympathetic activation, where fight or flight, and then you actively bring your nervous system back into balance by reducing your heart rate through your breath. So as you acclimate and you regulate your breathing, the parasympathetic nervous system, okay, via the vagus nerve, is going to be engaged. And this response is going to slow your heart rate. It's going to promote relaxation, and you almost get into this like wild, like meditative state. And you're going to feel your heart rate come down, and you're going to feel almost kind of heavy in the water. And this is where your body shifts its state from this heightened alertness to this feeling of absolute calm. And I think that's where people experience or will report like kind of these really spiritual kind of experiences in the cold. I'm a pretty big proponent of cold. As I said, I use it myself, and I've always really used it mainly for recovery. But but over the last few years or so, I've really been kind of leaning more into the spiritual side, the soul side of cold water immersion. And this is where, being out in nature, a cold a lake, in October, November, December, when you're surrounded by the trees and maybe the sun's setting or the sun's rising, it really can be powerful to kind of experience the shift in state, this really sharp kind of shift in state when you're kind of in nature, and then being able, I think, the confidence to be able to get your body under control in that state is really where I think people generate a ton of confidence. So it's kind of like I love talking about the autonomic nervous system and cold water immersion, because I think it's just this that's it's I think that moment where that you really actually feel when you're in the water. Some of this other stuff is a little bit more abstract, but this you will feel. And I think it's definitely a moment to really lean into. Yeah, to get the kind of full benefit. So cold water immersion also influences several neurotransmitters and hormones. So norepinephrine, which when we have elevated levels is going to enhance attention and focus, which will help contribute to mental clarity. So I have one little fun thing I have here at Whoop is I do cold tub Tuesdays where I take anyone who is new to cold tub, and we have a couple on the roof. Anyone who's new to cold tub, I take them through it, and they all report feeling kind of afterwards like super focused and really clear attention. And this is because when you get into the cold, you release norepinephrine. So it's an awesome, I think, strategy just to kind of wake yourself up, and in a way that's natural and, no chemicals, no caffeine, just a natural way to kind of enhance attention and focus. You also release endorphins. And just this last Tuesday, I took a girl through for the first time, and she slacked me and she's like, I'm still on my cold plunge high. So this is the feel good hormone. And this can kind of induce a feeling of euphoria and, for all the reasons we talked about in terms of it, cold kind of alleviating pain and kind of what it's doing to the nerve endings. You can also feel like some relief if you've got pain in certain areas of your body. And, kind of the result of all of this is a bit of improved mood. So lots of positive benefits on that side. All right, next up is dopamine. Cold water immersion is also going to increase dopamine levels, which are associated with motivation and pleasure, and mood. So there's a great study published in Medical Hypotheses um, that basically might be kind of explain some of the effects that we see. And what they saw is that cold showers actually might have an antidepressive effect because it's stimulating the brain's blue spot or the locus coeruleus, which is the primary source of noradrenaline. And this stimulation is kind of, I think, what's resulting in the increased in endorphin levels, which is then contributing to improved mood and reduced symptoms of depression. So it's kind of, a good explanation, I think, of what is happening mechanistically and why people are experiencing these effects. Another study found that participants who took cold baths reported feeling more active and alert, attentive, proud, inspired, indicating a lot of enhancements in just mood and psychological well-being. All right, so metabolism, cold water immersion and metabolism. There is definitely a lot of buzz around the idea that cold exposure can aid in weight loss and metabolic health. But what is actually the science behind these claims? What we know is that when you expose your body to cold temperatures, it activates a type of fat called brown adipose tissue, or BAT. And unlike white fat, which stores energy, BAT actually burns calories to generate heat. And this process is known as non-shivering thermogenesis. This means that your body is expending energy to maintain its core temperature. And a study published in Cell Reports Medicine observed that individuals who regularly engaged in cold water swimming exhibited enhanced cold-induced thermogenesis and altered BAT activity when compared to non-cold water swimmers. However, it's very important to note that this was an observational study and causality cannot be firmly established. Also, it had 16 males in the study, no women. So, sorry, women, we are not able to infer anything from these results. But just wanted to highlight it because it was really out there very publicly, and there's a lot of folks who make claims that cold water immersion is a dietary or is a weight loss strategy. And I don't know that there's really enough evidence to support that. So just want to make sure that, people aren't thinking that cold water immersion is going to replace all the other important lifestyle interventions that would help you get on a better metabolic path. So as mentioned, cold water immersion also induces the production of cold shock proteins. And these proteins play a role in regulating glucose metabolism and lipid homeostasis. For example, cold shock proteins influence the activity of metabolic enzymes in the liver, affecting processes like fatty acid oxidation and triglyceride synthesis. What this helps facilitate is a maintenance of energy balance and also helps regulate metabolic processes more effectively. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that acute exposure to moderately cold temperatures, so this is 18 degrees Celsius, which is 63 degrees Fahrenheit, actually improved insulin sensitivity by approximately 20% in healthy young men. So I'm sorry, ladies, we don't have a female equivalent of this study, but we did see that cold helps reduce insulin resistance in men, which was interesting. So all in all, cold water immersion, we know it activates brown fat and cold shock proteins, both of which are going to play a role in energy expenditure and metabolic regulation. More research is absolutely needed to fully understand these mechanisms, but I think it's clear that if we incorporate cold water immersion into an otherwise healthy lifestyle, there could be some compound metabolic effects. And I think overall, all of these findings that I've outlined are really promising, but it's super important to understand that cold water immersion is going to be a complement, not a replacement. Okay, it's a complement to other healthy lifestyle practices. So incorporating cold water immersion into a routine that includes balanced nutrition and regular physical activity could help enhance metabolic health. But cold water immersion on its own is not going to be sufficient. So I hope you found this information helpful as you kind of embark on this journey of harnessing the benefits of cold water immersion while also minimizing the risks. So remember, I think this overall journey to wellness is very personal. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just giving you ideas and options to, for tools and practices and ways of thinking about things that can support your unique path. So thank you for, joining me today on this exploration. And I hope the episode provided you with some clarity and inspiration to incorporate some of these practices into your wellness journey. Lately, I've been spending more time thinking about how I communicate science and how I can take something as complex as, say, heart rate variability and translate it in a way that really lands with people. When I was preparing for one of my recent talks, I found myself wanting to make the data I was presenting more intuitive and more visual, more human. And because my show sponsor Fiverr has such a great network of first-class freelancers, I decided I'd lean on one of them to really optimize my presentation. Don't get me wrong, I still spend hours collating and interpreting all the research, but working with Fiverr Designer meant I could take my information and turn it into something that's much more impactful for my audience. If you're an educator, a founder, or someone who wants to level up the way you communicate your ideas, Fiverr can make this incredibly easy just by connecting you with talented freelancers in a matter of hours. Fiverr has 700 service categories to help you with anything that you need, from AI specialists to marketing, product, tax consultants, and many more. Head to fiverr.com or click the link in the description and use code Kristen for 10% off your first hire. That's Fiverr.com.